All right, we'll get going in just 1 minute as people log in. We've got a lot of folks that are with us already. It's very nice to see so many friends who've logged in. Much appreciated. Susie, thank you for asking about my vacation. I highly recommend, this is not legal advice, but to everybody who's listening in, I do highly recommend taking vacations, even during a pandemic. I'd say perhaps especially during the pandemic. So in any event, hey Marcus, nice to see you. One of the things I miss about in-person is being able to see all of my friends in actual rooms rather than just a chat room and the like, you know? Okay, well, Tiffany, if you're ready, why don't we go ahead and get going?
Okay.
All right, terrific. Well, welcome everybody to this edition of the Interactive Dialogue. Today, our topic is marketing communication in uncertain times, in particular, social media and influencer guidance. And I'm really excited about today's presentation. I'll explain why a little bit, but I feel like I'm with an influencer right now. Tiffany, I'll let you introduce yourself in just a moment. But for those who have participated before, you're familiar with the format. For those who haven't, a couple of tips. First is that this is an interactive dialogue, and the idea here is to, rather than having a CLE presentation where we kind of throw 75 slides into the internet and for an hour and lots of text, this is a little bit different. We pick a topic, find an expert like Tiffany, and then explore that topic in very practical ways. And so the idea is to have interaction both amongst the panelists, namely myself and Tiffany, but also you as well. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen a little chat pane window, and there you can send us questions, and I highly encourage you to do that. We'll address any questions to the extent that time permits, and often I'll weave your question into the questions that I might be asking Tiffany on particular topics. If you want to ask something that's confidential, please mark it as such. I'll do my best. Well, for sure, if you say confidentially, I have this question, then I'll make sure it stays that way. And otherwise, I might say the person's first name if I know you, and then has a particular question, but without identifying their company necessarily. So please ask any questions that you have on this topic in particular. I find this topic, and somewhat uniquely for our food, beverage, and agribusiness industry programs, really applies to everybody. And in fact, I was very mindful of it even as we were advertising this particular program. The PowerPoint presentation that we'll be talking through is in your materials. There's a link to the materials that was in the invitation reminder that came to you yesterday. So if you want to refresh your memory, then please do so. And then also we are taping this program. And so if you want to go back to see parts of it or the like, then you're welcome to do that online, or you can send links and the like to friends or colleagues who you think might benefit from the information. So today's presentation is going to be really fun, and it really was sparked by a presentation that Tiffany gave in our food, beverages, and agribusiness group. But just 2 seconds about Dorsey and Whitney. Dorsey, as you know, is a major law firm. We have 19 practice offices around the world, and we have about 560 or so lawyers throughout the world. And we are organized both in technical areas, like, for Tiffany trademark, and she'll talk about that in a moment, but then also in industries as well. So we have 6 industry groups, one of which is food, beverages, agribusiness, and cooperatives. And that's the industry group that I'm part of. And we have regular meetings, and at those meetings, we will showcase topics. And Tiffany, you were nice enough to give us a little presentation about influencer marketing to the food and beverages group. Do you want to give a brief introduction to yourself as well?
Absolutely. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Shimada, and I am a partner in the Trademark and Brand Protection Group. I live in Salt Lake City and am am happy to present to you today. I enjoy practicing in this area because it involves a lot of different areas of interest: brand protection, copyright, trademark, advertising, social media. So you'll see, we'll get into the conversation, lots of exciting developments and hopefully some tools to help you issue spot and think about this particular area as it relates to food, beverage, and agriculture.
So in preparing for today, I learned that you, like me, also, I had jobs before law school. You've not always been a lawyer, is that right?
No, I've not. This is my second career. I started out in finance. So I was a financial analyst, and part of my job was IP valuation. So I used to calculate damages for IP litigation and also work on valuing portfolios of IP for donations. So this area has been in my life for quite some time. And when I went to law school, I knew I had to practice in IP. It was just, it was exciting to me.
And so for those who perhaps aren't lawyers, IP means intellectual property. And is trademark protection part of that overall umbrella?
Yes, it is. So there's kind of a trinity of copyright, trademark, and patent. And then you've got trade secrets is kind of related as well. But those are the areas of IP where you really focus. And my focus areas are trademark and copyright.
Terrific. So as we were kind of preparing, I said, wow, you're one of those few people who actually understands both the R and the I in ROI, right?
Yes, I do.
So why pick this topic? From your perspective, when we were preparing for and having the presentation to the food and beverages group, what made you say, oh, I'm going to talk about this particular topic to that team of people?
Well, I think the current pandemic that we have, and especially in dealing with quarantine, everyone's online. The way that we've experienced advertising as consumers has usually been a combination of in-person, and in particular in the food and bev industry, you're walking through a store, you see an end cap, and that's how you find out about new products, or that's how you find out about new brands that are out there that you might be interested in. But with the pandemic and everyone being at home, all of our experience with advertising, most of it, I would say, is now online. And so you see a lot of companies turning to online advertising to communicate with customers, to let them know about new brands and new products. And you also see consumers shopping more online, having their groceries delivered. Instead of going to the grocery store 2-3 times a week, now they either go once a week and have it delivered to their car, curbside, or they go in, buy everything they need, and leave. So it's a much different way of shopping, and it's a much different way of having to communicate with consumers about your brand when the focus has changed in how they're encountering information.
It's fascinating you say that. I work with some natural food cooperatives and the kind of organization that they're part of called NCG. And one of the aspects that's really been different lately is that people's shopping habits have really significantly changed. Like you said, the basket size, they often talk about how much people buy is different. The amount of time in the store is very different. The kinds of areas that are being shopped, like hot food cases, are not being shopped in the same way, although people still want ready-to-eat food and the like. And so that really would change if I were trying to get the word out that my type of toothpaste is better than others or new. Then how I get that message out is different, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think too, I think over time, as we've seen in general with culture, that the reality TV kind of really changed the game. And I feel like in the same way, social media is changing the game, and that consumers are interested in seeing kind of real life representations of brands and how to connect with a brand beyond celebrities and beyond, the brands themselves communicating.
Now, you mentioned here increased return on the investment if done right. If not, it can harm the brand. What do you mean by that?
Well, so most in business, like everything, it's measured, right? And you want to measure your success. So you had mentioned ROI, and that's just your return on investment. So that's your net revenue over your cost times 100, and that's typically calculated as a percentage. And the higher the percentage, it's kind of like thinking of it as more bang for your buck. So the lower the cost, the more you're going to reap in terms of rewards. And so if you can have people talking about your brand, for example, you get an influencer, someone who's promoting your brand, helping you out, that particular post can then be picked up by others and spread. And that additional spread doesn't really cost you anything. You've spent in terms of time and resources getting that influencer and brand ambassador on board. But from there, it's really having your fans and people who already like your brand spread the word for you.
Which means creating fans and making things that are fan worthy and the like, which we'll be talking about. Now, one of the comments you also make is it could, if not, it can harm the brand. What do you mean there?
Well, we can talk about some examples of, influencers gone rogue, or, social media just in its nature is not something that you can control as a brand. It's not just a brand speaking, it's society, it's consumers. And so it's going to take on its own nature and its own language once the message is out there. And you hope that it's good, but sometimes it can turn out poorly, or if you don't have the right amount of control. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about influencer contracts.
Terrific. So can you walk through, just in general, what is online advertising?
Well, as you can see from the graphic, it's a fairly broad category. It includes everything from emails to your customer list, to videos online, to specific social media campaigns and accounts. All of the different platforms, be they YouTube or Twitter or Instagram or now TikTok. It's basic advertising, which is promoting your brand, but on new and different media that, as we know, are coming out every day.
So what are the trends that you're seeing among your clients groups as far as their spend in online advertising, either contrasted with other types of marketing spend or even among the different verticals that one could choose?
Well, I'm seeing more clients interested in exploring online advertising. Now that we're all in this virtual world, I see clients coming to me saying, I want to do videos on YouTube, or I want to really engage with my consumers in a more authentic way. And so this is a great way to do that. I saw a study from Nielsen's, and the top 3 areas, at least at the beginning of the year before COVID hit, the growth in digital media and kind of benefits of digital media were in searching, videos, and social media. And those were the top 3. And I can only imagine that now with the pandemic, those areas are even more important as more people have moved online to do their shopping.
I read a really interesting article for those that are listening in involving El Pollo Loco, which is a very strong brand, and California in particular, other markets as well, for quick, ready-to-serve food and the like. And the CEO had addressed the changes they were looking at as far as their advertising spend and ways that they can use the digital advertising to really target the segments of their market that they found the most meaningful for their customer base. And is that consistent with what you've seen in the food industry generally?
Yes, as we see this explosion of celebrities and influencers who have cooking shows or have cookbooks, I think a lot of companies are wanting to use that to engage. You have a lot more people in the kitchen who didn't have time before, or people who now their favorite restaurants are closed, and so they're trying to figure out how to recreate those dishes, or they want to support the restaurants that are open, so they're ordering online a lot more. So I do see digital becoming a much bigger focus in this particular industry.
So one of the kind of interesting questions was what actually is an influencer? And as I said to you separately as well, I kind of feel like I'm giving a presentation with an influencer because you had more likes, I think, for this presentation than any other interactive dialogue that we've had. So what makes you an influencer or others as well?
Well, I'd have to poll and see what makes me an influencer, but I can tell you this isn't something that's necessarily new. I was curious about, I'm kind of a word nerd, and so Merriam-Webster, I like to get on there and find out when words started to be used, and influencer is a word from the 17th century, so it's a very, very old word in the English language. And supposedly the first influencer was Josiah Wedgwood, who marketed himself as Potter to Her Majesty, the Queen, in the 1700s. And we still know Wedgwood, to this day as luxury china. So I feel like, influencers over time, it can be anyone. It can be someone who's political, social, in your particular field, but it's someone who has that gravitas, someone who has a following, and has something to say, and people listen to whatever they say for whatever reason.
So have we seen a change in how influencers are used compared to other times in the recent past?
I think, with the whole advent of the Kardashians and the whole social media boom, you're finding that consumers are more taken with influencers, be they celebrities or not. It lends a certain aspect of authenticity to a brand that may or may not be felt when it's just the brand speaking. So I do think that this particular area has grown quite a bit in the last, say, 5 to 10 years.
So it's one of the rare times I've heard the word Kardashian and authenticity in the same sentence, but understood. You comment here in the quote, it references that there is a development of a social relationship asset. What does that mean?
Well, I think you have to think of your influencer as another fan of your brand. You're not going to have an influencer who doesn't like your brand or isn't going to engage with it. That wouldn't make any sense. So you've really got to look at them as an extension of your advertising campaign and treat them as such. I mean, they're bringing an audience to your brand. So there's a certain aspect there that they lend to your brand, and it's their credibility and their authenticity that is attractive to their audience, and so they're bringing that to you. Which
really kind of brings us straight to the next discussion topic. Namely, what can they do for and to your brand? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so you had mentioned, or we'd been talking about authenticity, and I think that that's really important here, as well as target marketing. Sometimes it can be difficult to figure out how you're going to reach a particular audience. And as we've seen in social media, you can have a group for anything. You've got now this cottage industry of influencer agencies. So just as you would go to a modeling agency or a talent agency to find someone promote your brand in the past, now you can go to an influencer agency and find people who would be a good match for your brand, and speak to a specific community. I mean, if you want someone in Seattle who is a great attorney and super personable, you might find Mike Droke on that list. So, you've got companies out here in this area that are specializing and making it easier to find influencers. And then the other side of that, I think as consumers, we've gotten really attuned to online advertising. Even my 5-year-old understands she just needs to wait a little bit to click that arrow to skip the ad, that arrow to skip the the commercial that's popped up. And I think that we all have kind of gotten used to the internet in ways that we can skip ad banners unless it's a brand we're familiar with and really like. We just kind of ignore it and it's become noise. Whereas with influencers, I'm seeking that particular person or that particular video or channel because I'm interested already. So you're kind of cutting through all of that noise when you find someone who's an influencer to help you promote your brand.
It's really interesting because you're talking about really an opt-in niche, right? That if I have to opt into an influencer to be influenced by that person, and I'm kind of welcoming that influencer into my world on the topic that's of their specialty, I guess. Is that fair?
Yes.
And so that means that from the advertiser perspective, you're going to get super targeted because I'm already kind of conveying to you through the influencer that I'm interested in this particular topic.
Yes. Yeah, that hard work of finding that particular audience has already been done. So in that way, it can be a cost savings as well.
Yeah, and then do advertisers tend to kind of already know or find the people who would be good influencers in their particular market? As you referenced that there now are agencies which broker the deal essentially, but do you kind of know who's already speaking to your customer base most of the time?
You should, just kind of in general brand management, you should be monitoring social media. You should know what people are saying about your brand. Both influencers, fans, and employees, you should have a general knowledge and awareness of your reputation and what's being said about your brand. So yeah, I think it's a natural extension to know who your influencers are.
So I was interested in the last two bullet points as well. And we've all, seen situations of people who had been influencers and then really go off the rails, for lack of a better phrase. Can you talk to that in particular for the food and beverages industry?
Yeah, so like with any advertising, it's got to land in the right place with consumers. And so if you have an influencer who ends up going rogue or the message takes on a shade that was not meant to begin with. I mean, that's the element here that's difficult for a lot of brands is you are losing a little bit of control. And we can talk about contractually how you can manage that. But I think the important part is to do your homework at the beginning, make sure that you find someone who can represent your brand and then educate them. And I think, we'll get into how you can educate them to stay within the confines of brand protection. Because ultimately, even if you're using an influencer or a brand ambassador, you as the brand are responsible for what they're saying. You're responsible legally. So going rogue and having someone take your brand and move it to, a place where you didn't intend can have very serious legal repercussions as well as PR issues.
So it would strike me then from a risk management perspective that you're kind of better off going with an agency that is going to at least provide some kind of infrastructure and maybe superstructure around the influencer to kind of hedge for the risk of this, right?
I think so. I mean, it's like with any other talent that you would contract with, you'd want to do your due diligence, background checks, if it's going to be a long-term relationship, especially, and this influencer has a large following, then that, you've got to kind of really dig in and find out who you're working with.
So the final question I had on this particular kind of topic was that you referenced that it can help navigate ad blocking features. And what does that involve?
So, I had mentioned clicking off videos or waiting for the commercial to go. we just, as consumers, our attention span is something like 3 seconds before we're looking for the actual message. And so when you're reading articles or encountering brands in that way, you can really just kind of push through a lot of that information. But with an influencer, it's like you said, it's an opt-in, right? Consumers are looking for you. Influencers are pushing that information out to their audiences on social media, through videos, through all of these other online channels that get you around those kind of, irritating little scrolls that come across your screen all the time.
So it's interesting you described your 5-year-old daughter, for example, who already knows when to push skip the rest of the ad part, right?
Oh, yes. She'll roll her eyes and just keep clicking on the X.
Boy, I mirror that behavior myself. So there you go. Now you mentioned that the brands are ultimately legally responsible for the content of the influencer, at least as to their brand, I would assume, right? How does that work?
So yeah, the Federal Trade Commission, which, I mean, this is nothing new in advertising, trademark, brand protection law, has been around since the early 1900s. And the law really is clear that whatever you say as a brand, it's got to be truthful and it can't be misleading in whatever medium. And whatever medium you're using to advertise, be it radio, television, and now online marketing. And so if you're using a brand ambassador or an influencer to promote your brand, you are still ultimately responsible for that message. You're responsible for it being truthful and not misleading. And that carries, like I said, from any form of advertising, any media.
So the key difference is, it seems to me, that the influencer is something that you've engaged and are paying, as compared to just a customer who's using the product and there's not really a privity of contract or anything like that back to the company. Is that true?
Yes.
And then you mentioned here that you should do your homework before hiring, and you alluded to this in the last slide as well, but what are the kind of minimum due diligence that you recommend before a brand engages an influencer? And that would be the minimum. And then I guess corollary to that would be, what is a very thorough homework look like?
Well, I think the minimum is just knowing who they are, what their followers are like. Do they have a big following? Which channels are they on? It's very easy to investigate someone through social media. You can have access to their past posts and what they've said about various issues. So at the very least, you should understand who the influencer is, what their personality is like. And that's kind of bare minimum. From there, I mean, you can go into very detailed investigations. You could, for example, hire a private investigator if you wanted to go into, the more general scope of their particular brand, and how they've engaged before. There's some tools out there, technology-wise, that can take you to old screenshots, older versions of websites. So if you really wanted to dig in, you can find more information about the person themselves. I think, too, if you wanted to work through an agency that does that kind of work, that could be helpful as well. But you want to then make sure, of course, that you're working with a reputable agency.
And then do the agencies give you metrics as far as the effectiveness of the influence that was provided for other things, like, how many click-throughs there were and how many purchases occurred as a result of click-throughs and things like that?
Yes, I know that there are some agencies that do that. There are some influencers who do that, who keep track of their own metrics. And you can ask the influencer to give you reports on their metrics. So how many followers they have, how many ad conversions do they have, how many clicks do they have. There's certainly a technology out there to track all of that. And brands themselves can take that information and figure out which types of campaigns and influencers are going to be best based on that, those particular data points.
And then my final question on this topic is that, I'm imagining you have an influencer and they have an audience, and then the audience can react as well, either retweets or the other things. And so to what extent do you recommend to brands that they look at what those people do? Because I'm assuming that there's not a direct liability risk for what somebody else is saying that's related to the influencer, but you'd probably want to know are the things that happen afterwards good or bad, right?
Right. Well, definitely monitoring is part of the game here. You can't just say, okay, influencer, go off and do your thing and, be good. You have a duty as a brand to monitor what people are saying about the brand. And you should be able to maintain control, at least in that relationship with the influencer, to have them do certain things to keep the message on track, whether that's, letting their fans know, like, this is taken out of context, or, this is the message I'm trying to convey. There are certain ways that you can give the influencer language to use, give them guidelines to work within to help them stay on brand, and then have some kind of insurance in place for when that message goes off brand. And we can talk about that through the influencer contracts as well.
Okay, terrific. Yeah, we're going to talk about contracts, I know, in just a minute. And so your last bullet point on the previous slide now says that there has to be a clear, conspicuous, and the like disclosure. And, I'm not online constantly like some people, but I rarely see what the kind of FTC warnings like you'd have for buying cigarettes or something with an influencer. So what's the law say?
Well, the law says that you have to disclose if there is a material relationship between you and the brand, be it financial, family, an employee. If you have a relationship where you're getting some sort of advantage, and financial doesn't just include money, it can include free product, it can include a discounted product or other perks. So the law says if you have that type of connection to where I, as a consumer, would want to know about that, or would think that that's important and might influence what you're saying about the brand, then you should disclose it. Then you should let people know that, hey, I'm getting free product, but I really do love this product. And there are certain ways that you can do that, but you do have to let folks know that there's a relationship there.
Got it. So if I'm trying to be an influencer for my kids, for example, then I should reference that, although I'm sure they would be horrified if I tried to do so.
Yes, you should definitely disclose when you're giving positive, glowing, recommendation to your children or anyone else in your life for that matter.
All right. And then does the FTC, this is guidance that you've referenced, but do they give examples as well of the kinds of things that are acceptable and the things that cross the line?
They do. So the guidelines were really expanded in 2017 for influencer marketing. And there are FAQs which go through just about every scenario that you can think of. The guidelines were updated November of 2019 for additional questions that people had in this space. Because as social media changes and grows, so do the advertising guidelines. And really, it's the same FTC laws that we have come to know and love from the early 1900s, but they're just applied to influencers to let them know what specifically is okay and what's not. And there are, for example, hashtags that they say you should use over others to clearly clearly and conspicuously show that there is a connection and that you are receiving a benefit. And it could be as simple as, hashtag brand ambassador, hashtag ad. So those are kind of what we've come to see in Instagram and Twitter, for example. And those hashtags are a result of these FTC disclosures required.
And so the link I'm assuming that's here is the link to those FAQs?
Yes, that's a good link. It'll take you to kind of a list of, again, frequent questions that people had when these guidelines first came out. And it's a really good resource. And I've shared this resource with clients, and clients have shared them with influencers in the actual contract to say, review these guidelines, review the scenarios, that apply to this particular relationship so that you're aware of what the FTC is saying are best practices in this area.
It seems like such an obvious minimum that you'd have a rep and warranty by the influencer that they've read, Read Monthly or some, cadence these guidelines so that they have them top of mind when they're doing their work, right?
Definitely. And you should also be giving them brand guidelines as part of brand protection and trademark and wanting to, secure your intellectual property. In addition to these guidelines, let them know, this is the best way to use our mark and to promote our brand. That language that they're using also helps to protect the brand and to enforce the brand down the road. So you want to make sure that this is kind of part of those specific brand guidelines as well.
So one of the topics, and Susie, thank you for reminding us on this topic as well, that I think it applies really to any company, but particularly food and agribusiness related companies where you have often a lot of employees and they are working at your grocery store or your co-op or the food company because in part they love the product, and that's a great way to get the word out. I found myself for clients that starting about 5 years ago, a little bit maybe before the FTC guidelines, that employers started to impose social media policies. But what are you finding as far as employee social posts?
Well, there are specific guidelines about employee posts, like you see here on the slide, hashtag employee, company X employee. That doesn't always work as a clear disclosure because the company name might not be the brand or the product. The consumers out there who don't have that relationship may not understand that that particular company makes that product or is the source behind the advertising. So it's not exactly clear to just put, hashtag employee. You've got to really say in the text of the ad, my company or employer's, brand, so that the connection is really clear. And as you mentioned, Mike, lots of companies have figured out, we've got to have some sort of internal policy with our employees, a social media policy, whether there are clauses in there that prevent disparagement. That's kind of a totally different area, but it is related. You should know as a brand what everyone is saying about your brand, including your employees, and hopefully it's positive. But if it's not, then you certainly want to make sure that you have safeguards in place on that side as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are so many implications of employee social posts. Sometimes they can be protected activity under labor laws, like the National Labor Relations Act. They can be things that are protected complaints, for example, of discrimination, harassment, or the like. And so really being aware of how employees engage in social media. There have been cases, for example, involving supervisors who were able to get or figure out the password and go in as posing as though they were the employee, and that's obviously unlawful activity and the like. So Do you see any kind of, I've seen social media policies, Tiffany, that have been like 7 pages long for employees, and then some that are really short. What's the appropriate balance that you typically recommend?
Well, I think, you have to really weigh the PR concerns with the risks. So I'll just give you an example. Last month, it was a really big news story that an employee of Chick-fil-A was posting these menu hacks on TikTok. And she had this huge following of people who are interested, who love Chick-fil-A, who wanted to get these menu hacks. And it ended up that she was fired. I'm guessing she, breached some sort of an employment clause. And the result, though, of her being fired, that's what went viral. And so there was this kind of backlash with the brand of her being fired. And so you kind of have to weigh, A, is what they're saying truthful? First of all, even if they are an employee or any other consumers, what they're saying truthful? And 2, is it misleading? I mean, those are the guidelines. And then beyond that, are we getting into, okay, was she sharing trade secrets? Was she sharing other confidential information that shouldn't have been shared? And so it's kind of like these layers of an onion. You have to figure out, under the context of brand management, how best to handle that. And so there's the PR side of it, but then there's also, like you said, lots of legal implications if it's an employee or someone who's contracted with the brand of where you can go. Maybe, and this is just hypothetical, perhaps her employer could have worked with her to say, hey, I noticed you have a huge following. We can't divulge secrets, but I want you to use your following to, continue to promote the brand. There are ways that you can work with employees, I think, and other consumers to be helpful in that instance. If you see them kind of going rogue, bring them back and keep them as fans and keep them as influencers and keep that relationship positive.
It's fascinating. Like many of the topics here, I think we could do an hour on this topic alone. Steve, who's listening in, asked some interesting questions about, what happens if you have posts that are political, ones like Mass Equal Un-American, and the like, other social movements like BLM. And, I think all this is an extension of the brand and also an extension of your employee relations to the extent that people are monitoring that. And really it emphasizes the critical importance, I think, of doing company monitoring so that you know how your brand's being used and the like. So you mentioned this a little bit, and just briefly, can you talk to how hashtags and other disclosures should be made?
Sure. So there are examples on this slide directly from the FTC guidelines as far as what is an acceptable disclosure, what is clear based on industry practice. So anything under that first bullet point will work. There are other examples that these guidelines give that will not work, like hashtag spawn or ambassador or just tagging the brand. In those instances, it's not exactly clear what the relationship is. So, hashtags can be very helpful. It's a very succinct way to disclose. And I think also that you've got to look at the context of the disclosure and the ad overall. So those kind of, if you think of above the fold in advertising, the way, you used to explain it is the ads needed to be above the fold of the newspaper in order to receive the most attention. It's the same with the posts on Instagram and Facebook and any kind of digital ad that's going to fit on your phone. You want it to be clear. You want it to be above the more line where the ellipses are. So that I don't have to dig for it. I shouldn't have to dig for your disclosure as a brand. I shouldn't have to dig for the fine print. It should be obvious that there's a connection. It should be clear. It should be at the top. And the last point is that, as we encounter new technology like TikTok and Instagram and all these different platforms, they have their own rules about advertising and about what you can do on their sites. And sometimes the platform doesn't do enough to fit the FTC disclosure rules. So for example, if you have an Instagram story, or you've got a Facebook story, and you've got this video element but no text, you actually need to overlay on your video, hashtag ad. And if it's a live video, you've actually got to keep saying periodically, I am a brand ambassador for X, because whenever I'm tuning in as a consumer, I might have missed that. So you can't just have it in one place, small font, under the fold. It's got to kind of be conspicuous and within the context, again, of the tools that you're using in whatever medium.
So I will confess, I think I have two new hashtags. One clearly is going to be word nerd. And then the other one now is more is the new above the fold.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep, that's true.
I like it. So obviously, I would think that the hashtags would be an important part of the influencer contract. And can you, how long are these agreements? What is an influencer contract? Can you talk to what they are?
Sure. So an influencer contract is a contract that you would typically find very similar to a model contract or any talent management contract that maybe you're already working with as a brand. So it's not that different. It's going to have a term. Typically, it'll lay out how many posts within a specific time period, how long the campaign is going to be, what they should say. So give examples of hashtags to promote the brand. Let them know you're going to be monitoring. I've heard tell of a clause in there, continuity of persona and character. So if you're engaging an influencer who is well known as a specific character or has the persona that you're looking for as a brand, put it in the contract. Let them know you should stay away from XYZ topics. You can add that to kind of keep the message on brand, if you will.
That's just fascinating. Maintenance of persona, kind of the glossary and language and feel of their own brand as an influencer would be really critical. It seems that's part of the reason that you're engaging them, right?
Absolutely. So the contract's also going to depend on who you're engaging. If it's a big celebrity, there's not as much leverage there, or they may have their own agenda that you kind of have to meet them halfway. And it may be part of an overall performance contract where you're expecting them to show up and sign autographs and go to certain events. And in that instance, it's going to be a lot more complex than, say, someone in small town anywhere that is doing one video for your brand. Not that it can't blow up, but your contract terms obviously are going to depend on your leverage between the parties and who you're working with as a brand. So you just want to be mindful of that. Some of those influencer agencies have a standard contract, and that might be enough for what you're wanting to do. But I would err on the side of getting it in writing as a brand, as opposed to not having something in place.
I mentioned this as we were preparing, but my kind of brushes with fame were actually in the food and agribusiness industry, and it involved contracts with Janet Jackson and Kathy Ireland and some others. And what I found was that there were contracts, and that really the more significant the influencer, then the more leverage they have. So it's, you kind of sign their agreement, and there's a lot of mutuality and bilateral provisions of your brand as well, and what they're willing to associate theirs with also. So
I'm jealous that you work with Janet Jackson.
Well, and then you say to consider termination for noncompliance. How does that work? I mean, what? Not just termination of the contract, but there could be damages. You might want to have posts taken down. That kind of thing. What are the provisions that people are recommended?
Well, definitely. We talked about the continuity of persona. There's also a morals clause, which is closely related. So any, if they commit a crime or are somehow, outside of the scope of how you would want someone interacting with your brand. You want that in the contract as a way to get out of that relationship. You also want to have other clauses that protect you as a brand to be able to use the material. So after the contract is over, can you use it? Can you continue to use the video? So who owns it? If there's content that's created, and then how long can you use it as a brand? So there's also a question of mutuality of ownership and IP rights as well.
Awesome. All right. So we talked a little bit already about user-generated content. I'm not a person who takes lots of pictures of everything I eat, but I've seen it happen. What are your recommendations as far as user-generated content?
Well, the biggest thing to remember here is that you don't own the content as a brand. You know, it is user-generated content, so it's owned by the user. And the biggest thing here is remember to ask for permission and to give credit. So there are lots of things that you can do as a brand. You can retweet it, you can share it with permission, you can like it, or you can respond. There are lots of ways that you can engage with the user to say that you like their material. But consider the user may not be the owner of the copyright. Maybe someone else took the picture and they're just posting it. I mean, we're seeing lots of cases where celebrities are being sued by photographers for posting their own photographs on Instagram. So you have to really be careful here.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I hear a lot, well, I want to use it. Isn't that fair? That's fair use, right? And people seem to think there's a gaping hole in the copyright law, but that's not the case, is it? You're shaking your head.
No. I mean, the worst defense is everybody's doing it, right? Like that will never carry you in a court of law. So, yeah, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a famous photographer. It could be, you know, you or me, Mike. If we take a photo, we own the copyright.
And the fact that everyone's doing it doesn't mean everyone's doing it properly.
That's right.
Which leads me really to hashtags, tweets, memes, oh my. What are the risks there? You have quite an example in the food industry too, as it turns out.
Yeah, so this is from 2014, and I don't know if you remember that Ray Rice, who was an NFL player with the Baltimore Ravens, he got into a controversy. He had hit his fiance at the time, Janae Palmer, and there was a writer who was really frustrated with the public discourse around this event. Her name was Beverly Gooden, and she herself was a domestic abuse survivor. And so she started the hashtag Why I Stayed for women and men and whoever was victim of a domestic abuse to be able to say, you know, this is why I stayed. And there was another side of it, which is why I left. So it was it was hashtag activism in a way to get the conversation started around this very public event. Well, DiGiorno saw that the hashtag was trending and used it with You Had Pizza. And obviously, you know, the PR around this was very negative. It was a very serious conversation about domestic abuse. And they had to come out and apologize very quickly and say, sorry, we didn't know what this was about. So you've got to make sure if you're going to engage in this public discourse on social media that you know where the tweet or the meme came from, what it means. There's a website called Know Your Memes where you can get a whole history of every meme and who started it. And it's really important to remember beyond PR concerns, the IP concerns. You know, are there copyright implications? Could you be creating confusion in the market between your brand and a competitor's brand as the source of the products that you ultimately want to promote? Is it a picture of a celebrity or a common person who has a right of publicity in their name and likeness? And so there are lots of things to think about before engaging in social media. Make sure that you have someone who knows what they're doing.
The idea of having to look up my meme, wow, okay. That's a whole new world, I will tell you, for sure. So, but it's important, I think, because, you know, your example here really conveys a critical message that it the misuse of a hashtag or a meme or the like could have very serious implications. You know, the response here, 1 million apologies, that is an extraordinary statement following a social media post, and one wouldn't want to have that happen to your brand. And so you obviously want the discussion to be positive. So it's important to do that kind of basic research, right?
Yes, yes, especially when it's everywhere. I mean, there's no excuse these days.
So I want to kind of end on a really important kind of topic that I always try to in these programs, and that is simple checklists. You know, we as lawyers, and we've got a lot of really great lawyers and friends on the line here today. And, you know, we're all professionals and we go back to our workplaces, and it's, you know, helpful to get information about a topic. But I'm curious about what are the top things that someone could go back the minute they're done with this program and do that would help kind of improve their company in this area?
Well, you know, definitely make sure that you are A, being truthful, and two, being clear and not misleading in what you're claiming. It's still advertising. Those basic tenets of advertising law apply, and the FTC is watching. There's serious implications for unsubstantiated claims, be it a competitor lawsuit, be it fines from the FTC, or you know, being put on, getting a warning letter, or having your advertising have to be reviewed by the FTC. So there are lots of implications here. You want to make sure that you are being truthful and not misleading. One.
Yeah, and before you move on, there's something I've always believed, which is not just be truth, but also have proof that you've done the substantiation. You know, if it's send yourself an email with the links to why it's truthful, or have a subfolder on a hard drive or H drive, you know, internal shared drive that has that kind of, you know, substantiation of the health or financial benefits. Is that good advice?
Absolutely.
Overkill?
Absolutely. No, not overkill. We could spend an hour on claim substantiation, and we've done these trainings with clients and issue spotting for claims. You know, if you say we're number one, well, you have to have the backup for that. You have to have done the research in your industry to say we're number one. So there are lots of issues with substantiating claims, especially in this industry. I think it lends itself to a lot of risk for health-related claims. You've seen a lot of companies in trouble for saying that their products, their food or beverages, increase your immunity and prevent COVID. So the FTC is really hot right now on COVID claims. They've always been hot on health claims and financial benefit claims. So if you're in this industry, you should be attuned that you know, any claim of a health-related benefit should be substantiated.
So, and then you mentioned doing your homework. What's the minimum you recommend people do following the program today?
Just make sure that you have some sort of monitoring in place. And this is kind of a combination of 2 and 3, to know what people are saying about your brand and to understand who it is that's promoting your brand. Whether you use an agency or not, you're ultimately responsible for what they say. So you would want to vet that as you would any other marketing campaign.
So I know I've worked with you personally, actually, with clients and set up watch notices and the like. What are those?
So watch notices are where you're looking to see if there are others out there who are planning on using your mark, whether it's, you know, a new application or a published application with the trademark registry. But there are other things that you can do. You could set up alerts through the internet. I have a lot of clients who use alerts, and they'll say, you know, I noticed this popped up, or this email, or this website. Also, your fans. You know, I have a lot of clients who get notice of infringers and bad things said about the brand through other consumers who really love the brand and are angry that there are others out there who are trying to disparage or, you know, take from the brand. So listen to your fans. You know, they're fans because you've already built that relationship and that trust.
And you've mentioned training of employees and marketing personnel. What kind of trainings do you recommend?
Well, I've done trainings with marketing teams and counsel for clients, just walking through the basics. What is your IP? How do you define it? Do you have safeguards around it? Have you trained your marketing team and your internal employees on how to use it in such a way that you don't lose your rights? And so there are lots of ways to talk internally about your brand as you would externally. It's a communication. So you want to make sure that you're at least on the same page with what is being said and have the message, again, be clear and truthful.
Fantastic. And then you say carefully vet promotions. By vet, you don't mean a veterinarian, right? What vetting do you recommend?
So contests and promotions are so easy, they're so quick. People think, oh, I'll just get this contest out there. Well, you could land yourself in a lot of regulatory trouble. Contests and sweepstakes are regulated under state laws, and they're different for every state. And if you have the elements, the right combination of elements, consideration plus chance plus a prize, then you've got a lottery. And if you have an illegal lottery, then you've got big problems. So definitely talk to your trusty brand protection attorneys, have them review the terms and conditions, the promotional materials that you're planning on advertising to make sure that it's within, the confines of your particular, state laws where you want to have that promotion and in line with the consumer protection laws for that particular jurisdiction.
Fantastic. So, obviously you and I are law partners, and hopefully that satisfies my now disclosure obligations that I know, but a shout out to you both personally and also by extension, the team that you work with across Dorsey, that I've always found that the advice that happens is both practical, fast, and comparatively inexpensive because it's so fast, which really is highly valued by the companies that we work with. So thank you. And then also important to know for those who are listening in that the USPTO and trademark and influencer protections, those are federal statutes. And so, Tiffany, I think it's true that although you reside in Salt Lake City, you advise clients all across the United States and even the world to some degree. Is that true?
It is true. Yes, it's like you mentioned, federal law, and we also work with counsel in just about every country you can imagine to protect brands and to enforce against misuse of brands, particularly online. So yeah, we're happy to be a resource. I want to plug really quickly the tmca.com, which is our blog. It's our group blog, and we often comment on recent cases and different developments in this area of the law. So make sure you subscribe if you don't already.
All right, terrific. Well, Tiffany, amazing. Thank you so much for this great presentation, super valuable and practical information. Couple of final things. Just first, that for those who are seeking CLE credit, that information was contained in the sign-in sheet from the reminder yesterday, and you should complete that and send it in to Michelle Hubble at the address that's on the screen now, or it's also on the sign-in sheet as well. And we'll send that CLE certificate out to you for those who signed the form. Also, for those who are interested, and I have a handy copy right here as well, we just issued the 3rd edition of the Cooperative Business Law Manual. It's now also available on Amazon as well with the link that's there. And then finally, just again, Tiffany, thank you. For those who are interested in contacting Tiffany directly, her contact information is here. Finally, we do have the next program in this series, which will be on capitalizing your cooperative and strategies that are specific to the cooperative model for obtaining new funding sources. So we encourage people to join us there as well. So Tiffany, thank you so much. With that, thank you all for participating, and go off to your next hashtag.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, everyone.